"Play something, then, if you really think you belong here." The words came out like a joke, a cruel dare thrown at a woman they thought was just the janitor. But what happened next left the entire auditorium in stunned silence. Monica Harris, a black CEO heading a billion-dollar arts education corporation, had spent a decade silently walking past the pianos at a prestigious music conservatory. She had never touched them, never spoken of the gift she had buried long ago. No one knew her story, no one asked, and no one believed someone like her could possibly belong on that stage, until a humiliating moment forced her to place her hands on the old, out-of-tune keys. And from the very first trembling note, the world began to change. This is the powerful, soul-stirring true story of how a quiet, overlooked woman stepped into the spotlight. Not with fame or credentials, but with soul, truth, and a sound that would awaken a forgotten piano and an entire generation. Watch until the end. Because when she plays her final note, you'll never see a CEO or a stage the same way again. On an early morning at Stratford Conservatory, one of the nation's most prestigious music schools, the first light of the day touched the tall glass windows as the door to the auditorium quietly opened. It wasn't a music professor entering, nor a talented student preparing for the upcoming Whitmore competition. It was a black woman in her late 40s, wearing a light gray coat, simple black trousers, and scuffed low-heeled shoes. No one noticed her, and if they did, their gaze simply passed over her as though she didn't belong here. Maybe a staff member who arrived too early, or someone lost and in need of help. A few students frowned. One young student mumbled, "Hey, you're not supposed to be cleaning now." But Monica Harris didn't respond. She simply looked straight at the stage, where the Steinway Model D grand piano stood, the largest and most expensive instrument in the conservatory's collection. Under the dim light, its black finish reflected faintly like the still surface of a lake. And in that moment, Monica seemed to stop breathing. 30 years. 30 years since the last time she sat at a piano. The day the hospital told her that her mother wouldn't survive, that insurance wouldn't cover the cost, that the bills would keep piling up. She was just 18, a promising high school student in the world of piano, who had been invited to audition at Berklee but had to decline because there was no scholarship. She gave up music to survive, worked part-time at a bookstore, sold coffee, wiped tables. Later, she built her career with intelligence, persistence, and the pain of being denied. Monica Harris became the CEO of Artium Holdings, a corporation focused on arts education and technology, investing in overlooked communities. They said she was reshaping the concept of arts education, but no one knew the real reason she started it all, because she had once been denied the chance to play her own music. Today, she came to Stratford not to sign contracts, not to speak or donate. She didn't need the stage, she just needed to touch the piano again, the one she had always watched from afar. The auditorium was empty. The rows of chairs were still covered with red fabric. The stage lights remained dim. Monica moved closer. Each step echoed softly on the wooden floor, creating an eerie rhythm, like the sound of a heartbeat. Her hands trembled slightly as they touched the edge of the piano. She ran her fingers over its smooth surface, as if she were touching a memory. In that moment, she wasn't the CEO of thousands of employees. She wasn't the woman who had spoken at TED, met the president, or been questioned by investors about losing strategic direction. She was just Monica, the young girl who stayed up all night learning the piano with her mother in a damp apartment in South Atlanta. A note echoed in her mind, not with sound, but with memory. The melody she had played at her 6th grade recital, the piece her mother had choked up and said, "You're not just playing music, you're speaking with the language of your heart." Monica's eyes welled up. She hadn't cried during the day in 20 years, but this morning, In a place she didn't belong, she began to remember who she had once been. In the corner of the room, a young security guard stood silently watching. He recognized her, but didn't speak. Perhaps because he saw the woman before him wasn't lost. She was coming home. The sound of footsteps lightly tapping on the wooden floor came from behind, pulling Monica back to the present. She was still standing in front of the piano, her hand gently resting on the lacquered wood lid, her gaze lost in the past. But the voice that rang out behind her brought a chill, not from the weather, but from the familiar judgment, steeped in privilege. "Hey, you want to play? This piano isn't for dusting." A young male voice, sharp and possessive. Monica turned slightly. A tall, athletic-looking young man in a custom academy suit, with neatly styled platinum blonde hair and leather shoes so shiny they reflected the stage lights. Blake Reynolds. She read the name from the badge on his chest. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Reynolds, the same surname as Marshall Reynolds, one of the major donors of Stratford Conservatory. The financial investment firm his father owned had recently contributed $3 million to a limited scholarship fund, only available to students of the highest potential. In Blake's eyes, that Steinway was a family asset, partially funded by them, and thus something not for strangers. Blake didn't ask who she was. He didn't need to. He had already assumed it. "Want to try a few keys? I think the tech department has a keyboard in the sound room, to avoid scratching the piano." Monica didn't answer. She smiled, not out of amusement, but because it was familiar. Familiar with that look, familiar with that tone. Years in boardrooms had shown her the same type of people wearing different faces, arrogantly assuming they could define others. She nodded slightly, taking a step back as if to leave, but just then, another voice cut in. Quieter but clear. "Are you Monica Harris, CEO of Artium Holdings?" Jordan Lee, a security officer from the academy, had just entered from the hallway holding a clipboard with shift schedules. His eyes widened in surprise, then shifted to confusion. Monica gestured subtly, her finger to her lips, a gesture both soft and firm. "I'm here as a music lover. Don't say anything." She said quietly enough for Blake not to hear, but just loud enough for Jordan to understand. Blake turned to Jordan, raising an eyebrow. "You know her? Is she a guest of the school?" Jordan hesitated for a moment, then shook his head, not lying, but out of respect. "No, I just thought I'd seen her somewhere." Blake snorted, as if the answer only confirmed his bias. He walked over to the piano, running his hand across its surface, pretending to scrutinize it for damage, then smirked. Fingerprints. Maybe the technician should be reminded about who's allowed to touch the piano. Monica's gaze turned cold in an instant, but her response was as light as a breeze. A piano is for playing, not just for admiring. Blake froze for a moment. Not because of the words, but because of the way she looked at him, neither humbling herself nor angry, as if she had encountered hundreds of versions of him before and no longer found it frightening. "Are you a teacher?" he asked, glancing at her name tag that she didn't have. Monica shook her head, then slowly lowered the lid of the piano, as if giving it one last gentle caress. "I used to be a student, but then life told me to take a break." Blake laughed, a short, dismissive laugh. "Ah, one of those I almost made it stories. We hear them all the time at my school." Jordan tightened his grip on the clipboard. He was about to say something, but Monica raised her hand to stop him. She didn't need anyone to protect her, not now. "Mr. Reynolds," she said his name deliberately, "maybe one day when you're actually able to play a piece that makes others go silent to listen, you'll understand. No one truly owns a piano. The only one it belongs to is the one who can awaken it. Blake opened his mouth to retort, but he didn't get the chance. A logistics staff member called him to prepare the practice room. Monica turned back to look at the piano one last time, then walked off the stage. But no one knew. At that moment of being dismissed, a spark had ignited deep within her. A fire that had once been extinguished by illness, poverty, and prejudice. Now it burned again, not for revenge, but to play the unfinished piece of her life. The stage door closed behind Monica, but the echo of the small collision between her and Blake Reynolds still reverberated in her chest. Not because of the sarcasm, but because she had responded. She had opened her mouth, stood tall, and said what she believed. Something she had learned to hide for the past 30 years in boardrooms, fundraising calls, and dinners with the elite, where every word was carefully measured. Just one piano key. As her hand rested on the middle C key, the pure, solitary sound rang out into the vast space. The past rushed back like an odorless wind, but one heavy with gravity. She was Monica again, the 10-year-old girl living in Southside Atlanta, where cheap rental apartments crowded together beneath tangled power lines and flickering streetlights. On weekends, her mother, Lorraine Harris, took on a second job at a jazz bar called Blue Lantern. Not being able to afford a babysitter, she took Monica with her. She would sit quietly at the back of the room near the speakers with a glass of Coca-Cola and a notebook for practice. But what fascinated her more than any toy were the old man in the soft felt hat sitting beside the rickety upright piano on stage. His skin was darker than the night, his hands wrinkled, with nails sometimes stained with cigarette resin. But when he played, the world stopped. His name was Elias Smooth McCoy, the man everyone in the neighborhood called the one who speaks through the piano. On nights when the bar had few customers, he would let Monica sit on the cushion chair, his hand gently resting on hers, guiding her through each note. "Can you hear it, kid? It's not the sound. It's the emotion. Some people spend 10 years learning to hit the right notes. Some people, like you, just need to listen to know how to tell the story." He didn't teach with books. He taught with his gaze, with the way he kept rhythm with his knee, and by allowing her to make mistakes and then figure out how to correct them. Every night when she went home, Monica couldn't sleep. She'd lie in bed, clutching her pillow, replaying the short blues piece he'd taught her that evening. Back then, music was the biggest and most beautiful secret she had ever kept. But then her mother got sick. Terminal liver cancer. No insurance. No money for treatment. Monica had just been accepted for a partial scholarship to Minor Hill Music Academy. Not enough to cover everything. But it was her dream to step into the professional world. She didn't go. She chose to work at the laundromat, then deliver food at night. She sold an old electric guitar on Craigslist, exchanged it for a money counter and GMAT prep materials. She became a woman of the real world, earning money, paying bills, setting goals, and burying the only thing that ever allowed her to breathe. After her mother passed, she never returned to Blue Lantern. The bar closed a few months later for lack of funds. Elias McCoy, the only teacher she'd ever had, vanished like the last wisp of smoke in the night. Years passed. Monica started a business, failed, started again, faced discrimination for being a woman, ignored for being black, looked down on for not having an Ivy League degree. She fought in the way they understood: balance sheets, growth strategies, investment contracts. She spoke their language, but she was never herself. She had never mentioned Elias, never brought up the old bar, never played a note. Even though at charity events sponsored by Artium Holdings for small arts schools, she was often invited to play something for fun. She always declined, smiling. "I'm an investor, not an artist." But late at night, when all the emails had been answered, Monica sat alone in her 18th floor apartment in Cambridge, Boston. Her hand would rest on the table, tapping out a rhythm unconsciously. Old notes would rise, fragments of music with no names, no staves, only existing within her body, like children never born. This morning, when she touched the piano at Stratford, all those buried memories rose on their own. No need to call them. She had once thought that music had died within her, but now she knew it had only been locked away. And today, the look from a student named Reynolds didn't hurt her. It only unlocked the lid she had kept shut for 3 decades. She was no longer the 10-year-old girl at the bar, nor was she the CEO behind hundreds of inspiring speeches. She was someone who had never heard her own music and would not let the rest of her life continue in silence. Monica sat at the last row of the auditorium after leaving the stage, her hands clasped together on her lap, her eyes fixed on the piano now obscured by the drawn curtains. She didn't leave. Not because she hadn't yet, but because she didn't want to. For the first time in many years, she didn't feel the need to go anywhere. The sound of footsteps echoed again, but this time it wasn't the self-assured click of Blake Reynolds's leather shoes, but the steady, sure steps, familiar like the heartbeat of a sentry. Jordan Lee, the young security officer, appeared quietly, like how a piece of music enters your heart, no introduction needed. He sat down beside her, not looking directly at Monica, but following her gaze to where the piano stood. "Do you know what tomorrow is?" She smiled faintly, her voice hoarse after the emotionally charged morning. "Saturday." Jordan chuckled, then shook his head. The Whitmore Invitational qualifiers, 9 a.m. in this auditorium. Monica turned to look at him for the first time since sitting down. There was no doubt in her eyes, only something hard to name, like hope, but diluted with the weariness of someone too familiar with living without dreams. "And what do I have to do with that?" Jordan pulled out a folded sheet of paper from his jacket. He unfolded it, smoothing the creases, and placed it in her hand. A wild card application, a slot reserved for amateur artists to be submitted directly before 6 p.m. today. "I think you should submit it." Monica looked at the paper, then back at Jordan, her eyes almost still. "I'm a nearly 50-year-old CEO. I never studied music formally. I don't have a mentor, no sheet music. What would I play? A fragment from my 10-year-old memory?" Jordan didn't answer immediately. He leaned forward, resting his elbow on his knee, his eyes still fixed on the stage. "You play like each note is a scar being strummed again." The words made Monica pause. "I've heard many people play here, a lot. Skilled technique, hands moving effortlessly, speed like a machine. But with you, you don't play to perform. You play like it's a matter of survival. That's not technique, Miss Harris. That's truth. And maybe that's what this world has forgotten." Monica fell silent. Her hand tightened around the application form. She looked at the rows of seats in the auditorium, once a symbol of a world she didn't belong to. She thought of Elias McCoy, of her mother, of the nameless piece of music she still played in her head every late night. "I don't have sheet music." "You can write it yourself." "I don't have performance shoes. No one listens with their eyes." "I don't have time to start over." Jordan turned to her, finally meeting her gaze. "Maybe you're not starting over. Maybe you're just coming back." Behind them, Blake Reynolds walked out from the practice room next door, slowing when he saw Monica still there. He raised an eyebrow, then smirked. "I thought you'd be gone by now. Seems like this stage has a strange pull on people without a part." Monica didn't turn around, but Jordan stood up, politely but firmly, positioning himself between them. "Whitmore has a wild card spot. Anyone can try." Blake shrugged and laughed. "Sure, try. But she knows this competition doesn't have a place for fairy tales, right?" Monica stood up, still holding the application form in her hand. She walked past Blake without looking at him, simply letting a line fall that would echo in his mind. Fairy tales aren't real. But the truth, sometimes it makes entire castles fall. On her way home, Monica still held the application in her hand, not putting it in her bag. The Boston autumn wind blew gently against her collar, but she didn't feel cold. She thought about something bigger than music, a testament, a demand, something that needed no stage, only the courage to speak. She didn't know if she had the courage, but for the first time in many years, fear was no longer the only voice within her. On the subway ride south to Boston, Monica sat by the window, still holding the application form lightly in her hand. She didn't read it again, but the sensation of that thin paper felt heavier with each passing minute. The wind whistled through the window, making a rhythmic clatter. The scenery outside passed by like chapters already turned, but never truly finished. The old red brick building where she had lived since the early days of founding Artium Holdings appeared at the end of the street. No sign, no elevator, just creaky wooden stairs and peeling paint around the handrails. Monica climbed each step with the feeling that she was entering a storage room of the past, where every version of herself waited behind door 3B. The apartment opened with a soft click. Inside, everything was the same. Scratched wooden floors, a gray sofa chair, a bookshelf filled with leadership books and market analysis reports, and a small corner where a wooden box sat beneath an old painting. The box she hadn't opened in 10 years. Monica moved toward it and sat down on the rug. She touched the wood surface as though touching a memory still beating. Inside was the Casio electric keyboard, its black paint chipped, the wires haphazardly coiled, and a stack of faded music sheets, where she had once scribbled down melodies that had never been named. She turned on the keyboard. The first note sounded, sharp, off-key, and rough. Monica closed her eyes. Her left hand searched for the chord she had played during rainy nights in Southside. Her right hand pressed each note, trying to piece together the long-torn memory. A melody slowly emerged, incomplete, unrefined, but alive. It was the same melody she had played for her mother when the hospital had informed them that there were no other treatment options. That night, they said nothing. Monica simply sat by her mother's bedside and played. Each note was a farewell she couldn't say. That melody was still here. No sheet music needed. It was in her muscles, in her bones, in the regions of her memory that no mergers or acquisitions had ever touched. She opened the competition flyer. The paper was crinkled at the edges, but the faded print still read clearly, "Sometimes greatness hides in plain sight." She smiled faintly. The phrase sounded like a beautiful lie, printed to cover up the truth. The world doesn't search for greatness that's hidden. It only honors what's exposed at the right moment, in the right place, with the right skin and the right appearance. She was about to crumple the flyer and throw it into the trash next to the kitchen. But then she stopped. Something inside her, an old crack, but not fully broken, pulsed. She folded the flyer neatly, like a letter that had never been sent, then placed it in the second drawer, where she still kept certificates she once thought unnecessary. her community college diploma, the papers for her first company's registration, and the scholarship rejection letter from 1996. That night, Monica lay in bed, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, the glow of streetlights filtering through the curtain. She thought about Blake Reynolds, the young man whose smile represented the entire system she had to overcome to enter the business world, but who had never challenged her with music. She thought about Dean Celeste Hanover, the judge of the competition, who would likely see her non-formal training as a joke among hundreds of contestants with credentials from Vienna to Juilliard. And she thought about herself, Monica Harris of today, who could stand in front of a national evaluation committee to defend an $80 million project without batting an eye, but had never dared to stand before a piano to tell her own story. By dawn, Monica still hadn't slept. On the bedside table, the application form remained open. Not filled out, not signed, but one thing was certain: she hadn't put it away. And for someone like Monica, who was used to making decisions coldly and decisively, keeping a door slightly ajar was a sign of a storm on the horizon. The next morning, Monica walked through the iron gates of Stratford Conservatory at precisely 8:12, 48 minutes ahead of the final deadline to submit the wild card application. The air was crisp, and the morning mist still clung to the marble steps leading into the main hall. She wore a knee-length gray coat, sleeves rolled back to reveal the frayed cuffs of an old sweater, and carried a worn brown leather bag with a frayed strap. No performance attire, no instrument, no business cards. The application was handwritten, the script slightly slanted, direct and neat, just like the person who wrote it. In the music qualification section, Monica left it blank. In the piece to be performed section, she wrote 4 simple words, as bare and raw as a challenge. Original, untitled composition. As soon as she stepped into the waiting area, where the other contestants were sitting, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't loud, but there was an obvious change. The glances, the raised eyebrows, the conversations interrupted midway. A female student in a deep blue velvet dress leaned over to her friend, whispering just loud enough to be heard. Must be someone's mom dropping off a forgotten item. Monica walked toward the registration desk, where Meredith Clark, the Whitmore program coordinator, was checking the printed list. A woman in her 40s, with high-bun black hair, silver-rimmed glasses, and a name tag crookedly attached to her vest. Meredith looked up, her gaze polite but cautious. "Hello, how can I assist you?" "I'm here to submit the wild card application," Monica replied, placing the paper on the glossy wood desk. Meredith paused briefly. Her eyes scanned Monica from head to toe, then lingered on the CEO part of her self-introduction. "You're a freelance artist?" Monica smiled, not bothering to adjust her tone or lower her voice. "I'm a CEO, and I used to play music, back when I still knew how to dream." A quiet laugh came from the seats behind her. Then a male voice rose, unmasked. "Oh, she probably plays Beethoven on an Excel spreadsheet, right?" A few people chuckled. Another voice followed, low but sharp. "Watch out. Maybe she's here to audit the competition's budget." Monica didn't turn around. Not a muscle in her face twitched. Only her right hand on the desk clenched slightly, her nails pressing gently into her palm. Meredith nodded, her voice shifting to a cold, professional tone. "Thank you for participating. You'll be the last one called this morning." Monica sat down in the row of seats along the wall, separated from the group of younger students exchanging large sheet music scores, tapping rhythms on the backs of their chairs, or occasionally glancing at her as if guessing how far this odd character would carry the joke. Preston Caldwell, The one who had made the Excel comment was among them. He wore a black tuxedo with a red silk handkerchief tucked in the pocket, sitting with one leg crossed over the other, holding a BAM Paris violin case. He turned toward Monica, smirking. "I guess you'll play some old-school jazz, right?" "Very nostalgic." Monica looked directly into his eyes. "I'll play what I still hear. Not sure if it's in the music theory books you study, but it's real." Preston snorted, turning away, but his eyes weren't as confident as before. Because in her words, something made the dazzling techniques and long-winded education seem powerless. A while later, Jordan Lee appeared at the end of the hallway. He wasn't in his security uniform today, just a gray turtleneck sweater and a coarse fabric coat. When their eyes met, Monica simply nodded. Jordan walked over, sat down beside her, and remained silent. "You're still submitting," he said quietly. "I didn't want to, but I couldn't not do it." Jordan glanced at the other contestants, the ones with the pasts of Vienna concerts, Salzburg classes, master classes from Juilliard professors, then turned back to Monica. "They think you're an intruder." "I'm not an intruder, I'm coming back." Jordan didn't laugh, but his eyes lit up. It was as if he had just seen the lights flicker on the stage, where everyone still thought there would never be a role for her. The bell rang. Meredith stood up, announcing, "First contestant, please prepare. We will call in order. The last one today is Monica Harris." The entire room turned to look. Preston pretended to clap slowly 3 times, his voice indifferent. "Well, this will be an interesting finale to the morning." Monica sat still. Her heart began to race, but her eyes no longer looked at them. She was looking through the walls, to the piano on the other side of that door. The piano she had only been allowed to dust, but never to touch. The black wooden door creaked open. The coordinator stepped out from the performance waiting room, calling the last name on the morning list in a flat, somewhat reluctant tone. "Monica Harris." Monica stood up. The sound of the chair scraping against the floor filled the unusual silence. A few contestants exchanged glances. Preston let out a soft whistle. And Jordan, still sitting at the end of the hallway, simply nodded slightly, saying nothing, as if sending a message. "It's your turn now." She walked through the door, light but decisive. Inside was a smaller auditorium than the main one, with a light-colored wooden stage and 3 spotlights casting golden beams onto the Steinway Model D piano. On the judging podium, 3 judges sat behind a long table covered with a green velvet cloth. In the middle was Dean Celeste Hanover, silver hair pinned up, a flawless cream blazer without a wrinkle, and a pair of thin-rimmed glasses that gleamed with every small movement from the contestants. Monica stopped at the center of the stage, standing straight. No smile, no bow for politeness. Just her presence, whole and silent, like a long pause in a piece of music. Dean Hanover pushed her glasses up with her fingertip, her voice even and steady. "Ms. Harris, I see here you've chosen to perform an original composition. No sheet music." "No. And you are? Without any academic background?" "I learned from life." A slight shift passed through the 2 judges beside her. A middle-aged man with curly brown hair, his eyes skeptical. The other, a younger woman, focused on taking notes without looking up. Hanover tilted her head. Her gaze was no longer exploratory, but more like assessing an unfamiliar ingredient placed into the kitchen of a Michelin star restaurant. Then, with a smile that was both velvet and edged with steel, she spoke. "I think that old upright piano in the corner of the room might suit your unique style better The room seemed to pause for a beat. The upright, the mahogany piano tucked away in the corner, hadn't been used in any competition for years. It was old, the keys yellowing, some notes no longer in tune, the pedals loose. Everyone understood the implication: you're not worthy of the main piano. Monica stood still. She understood this arrangement well. She had been invited to sit at the table too many times in life, but never with the right to touch the microphone. Listed on the roster, but never truly a contender. Called to the stage, but always as the one introducing. Never the main character. She walked toward the upright piano. The wooden floor creaked underfoot, echoing the sound of time left behind. She sat on the slightly deflated cushion, adjusting her position with one hand, while her other hand lightly ran over the chipped keys. Dean Hanover sat up straight, hands clasped in front of her, continuing her voice, smooth as honey but with a bite. "I'm afraid that piano hasn't been tuned. But if you feel it's not suitable, we understand." Monica raised her head to look at her. Her eyes weren't angry, nor were they submissive. It was as though she knew the other person was lying, but didn't need to expose it. "The piano doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be heard." A silence settled, as if someone in the room had dropped their ego to the floor. She placed her hand on the keys. It was the first time Monica Harris had played in front of others in nearly 3 decades. No warm-up, no introduction, no stage setup. Just her, and the story she had never told in words. The first note sounded. Heavy, muffled, slightly off-key. But no one laughed. Because from the very first seconds, this woman wasn't playing to please anyone. She was playing to survive. Her left hand kept the rhythm, like tired footsteps in the hospital hallway. Her right hand guided the melody, broken fragments, dry chords, as though recalling a life buried in books, reports, and empty handshakes. A few of the judges leaned in. The young female judge stopped taking notes. The man with curly hair squinted, surprised. Only Dean Hanover still wore the smile, but it was no longer serene. Her lips were slightly pressed together. Her hand on the table began to tap gently on the wood. Monica kept playing, not looking at anyone, not waiting for anyone, as if the piano had waited a lifetime to tell the story no one had ever asked for. The first note rang out, slow, hoarse, slightly off-key due to the worn-down keys, but real enough to make the room breathe softly. Monica didn't press the keys to show off technique. She touched them like someone touching an old scar, not to expose it, but to remember that she had survived. Her left hand held the harmony, dark but steady, like the footsteps of someone walking down a hospital corridor at midnight. Her right hand slowly began to weave a melody, not quite jazz, not quite gospel, but a language woven from life. From the melancholy of a hymn heard through a church wall when there wasn't enough money for a service. From the silent laughter in a smoke-filled bar, where the old musician once placed his hand on hers. From the irregular heartbeat of a black woman forced to speak in a boardroom full of white men, not with words, but with her presence. At first, there were whispers from the row behind. Someone shifted in their seat. A small sigh, a shake of the head, maybe disappointment, maybe confusion. But Monica didn't hear those things. She heard the piano. She heard the cracks in every worn key, the strain of the old strings, and the unspoken sobs of herself, from the years when she sat behind a bar, too afraid to dream of a stage. One note after another, the composition took shape. She didn't play with the steady rhythm of a metronome, but with the breath of memory. At times, the music swayed, as though it might shatter, but then it pulled itself together, like someone crying, but holding on to their breath so they wouldn't collapse. The room fell silent. The young female judge put down her pen, her eyes fixed on the stage, as if, despite all her years of music theory, this was the first time she understood a piece of music without needing sheet music. The man with curly hair squinted, his head slightly tilted, his face softening. It seemed he wanted to break down the melody with theory, but then he gave up. Because what was ringing out wasn't from books. It was from blood. Dean Celeste Hanover sat upright as before, but her hand had stopped tapping. Her lips were pressed together, not out of emotion but out of confusion. What she had expected was a clumsy performance, perhaps emotional but messy, something easily marked unsatisfactory to maintain the standardized structure of the competition. But what Monica was weaving couldn't be classified, because it wasn't a piece of music, it was a testimony. Monica closed her eyes. She no longer saw the three judges, didn't notice the lights, didn't hear the harsh words from the hallway. In her memory was the image of her mother, lying on her side in the hospital bed, her frail hand gently tapping along to the rhythm of the old electric piano she had brought into the room. It was the crisp sound of coins falling when she worked as a waitress at a coffee shop. All of it mixed into a rhythm, and she was just the one keeping it from fading. The old upright, which initially emitted awkward, stiff sounds, slowly blossomed under her hands, as if the piano itself had just realized that, for the first time in years, it was no longer considered a cheap tool for beginner students. It was being listened to. And so, it sang. When Monica finished, there was no applause, not because the audience was indifferent, but because they hadn't yet caught their breath. The final note rang out, not grand, not prolonged, but a complete, silent period. Like the door closing after someone had said everything they needed to say, with no need for anyone to acknowledge it. 1 second, 2, 3, then a clap from the back. Slow, decisive. The man with curly hair stood up, nodded. The female judge beside him also stood. Her eyes were wet. No words. Only Celeste Hanover remained seated, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes never leaving Monica. But this time, that gaze was no longer that of a judge to a contestant. It was the gaze of someone guarding a gate, witnessing a wall crumble. The moment of silence after the first clap hadn't even touched its depth when Dean Celeste Hanover stood up. The sound of her chair scraping back was dry and sharp, like a subtle slap on the table. She walked down the stage, her heels clicking evenly on the wooden floor, each step a rhythmic beat of power honed over many years of sitting at the highest seat in the conservatory. As Monica stood up from the piano bench, she felt the shift in the atmosphere. Not from the piano, but from the eyes of those who had been holding the system together, now beginning to crack. Dean Hanover stopped just a few steps away from her. No one stopped her. No one dared. "Thank you for your emotional performance," Hanover spoke, her tone sweet yet every word sharpened with precision. However, the Whitmore Invitational is a competition that demands technical standards and a deep understanding of classical music heritage. Could you, perhaps, demonstrate your skill through a Chopin piece? The room held its breath again. Monica turned to look at the upright piano, the one she had just breathed life into. Then she looked into Hanover's eyes. There was no hostility there, but something even more intimidating. The smooth control of a system that had long been used to defining the worth of others. "No," she replied, her voice as even as the notes she had just played. "I didn't come here to imitate what you expect. I came to tell my own story." Hanover smiled lightly, the smile of someone who had made the best students in the country cry with a casual remark. Stories are a form of emotional expression, But music is also technique, structure, history. You cannot have expression without a foundation. Then she walked toward the piano. "Allow me." She sat down, gracefully, perfectly positioned. No preparation, no need to look at the keys. Her hands fell into place, and the first notes of Nocturne Opus. 9 number 2 rang out, precise, cold, beautiful in its indifference. Every note was right, every transition was seamless. But the room, after being awakened by Monica, now sat still like a museum. When she finished, no one applauded. Only polite silence. But for Hanover, that was enough. She turned back to face Monica, her voice soft as the wind. "That is the standard. Do you want to try again, or should we end it here?" Monica didn't respond immediately. She walked back toward the upright piano, placed her hands on its frame, not hurried, not justifying, not trying to explain anything more. Then she turned back to look directly at Hanover, not with anger, but with an implacable calm. "I will continue, but not to please anyone, to live truly." And then Monica sat down. She didn't look at the judges, didn't look at the audience. She placed her hands on the keys as if reconnecting her own pulse. This time, the music didn't begin with hesitation. It began with a surge, a fierce opening. Her left hand striking thick, biting bass notes, like footsteps pounding on the cold, concrete floor of stolen youth. Her right hand soared, no longer the whisper of the one longing to be heard, but the declaration of someone who had waited too long to speak. The judges behind her no longer sat upright. One leaned forward. The young female judge clasped her left wrist, as if to hold herself from leaping to her feet. Preston, standing silently at the back of the room, squinted, but no longer smiled. Only Celeste Hanover remained motionless, but this time her eyes on Monica no longer held judgment. They held risk, because she knew, deep within the system she had helped build, a system that prized standardization, feared uncertainty, what Monica Harris had just played was an infection, and it had begun to spread. Monica's fingers no longer hesitated, no longer waiting to see who would laugh, who would nod, who would score. This time she played as if stepping through a door with no way back. The music continued, and gradually transformed the auditorium into a space no longer tied to academic music, but to the human heart. She didn't play like a performer. She played like a survivor. Her left hand struck a series of dull, somber chords, like the years buried under rejection, under the prejudices of race, age, and gender. The chords were not smooth, not technically clean, but full of life. Her right hand danced on the keys as if rewriting a language, melodies intertwining between gospel and blues, jazz and the melancholic lullaby of a broken childhood. She played with the interrupted breaths once shared in her mother's emergency room. She played with the whistle of late-night buses she used to take home after shifts cleaning. She played with the mocking laughter the world had thrown in her face, and turned it into music. Each note was a scar. Each chord was the glory of one who had been denied. The curly-haired judge, a longtime professor from Juilliard, had stood up. His hand rested on the table, as if needing support to keep himself steady. His eyes were filled with tears. The young female judge hadn't written another word since the third measure of the piece. She just watched. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm as if she, too, was the one performing, though her hands hadn't touched the keys. Outside the waiting room, footsteps stopped. Several other contestants began to stand in the hallway, silent, their eyes fixed on the open door. Even Preston Caldwell, who had once mocked Monica with his upper-crust jokes, now leaned against the wall, arms no longer crossed in front of his chest. His face was no longer one of someone who knew the outcome. It was the face of someone who had just realized there was something he could never learn, and may never understand. Monica played the final section with her whole body. Her shoulders leaned into the piano. Her head bowed, but her eyes remained open, not looking at the keys, but looking through the music, as if facing once again all that life had taken away, and this time refusing to let it disappear in silence. The conclusion didn't come with a technical flourish, no tremolo or glissando. It ended with a low, heavy note, like a stone, held in the air for a few seconds, then fell into silence. No one breathed. The room, once full of the noise of contestants tapping rhythms, the rustle of papers, and the whispers of the judges, was now as quiet as a chapel. And then a single clap. Not from the auditorium, but from behind the stage. Jordan Lee stood at the wing, clapping slowly, steadily, and not out of politeness. Immediately the entire room erupted, not the polite applause of the arts, but the instinctive reaction of humanity, having just been touched by something deeper than memory. The curly-haired judge stepped forward. His eyes were red. His voice was choked, but firm. That wasn't a piece of music. He looked directly at Monica, not as a judge anymore, but as a witness. That was a testimony. Hanover remained seated, her back straight, her lips tightly pressed together. She didn't clap, but for the first time her eyes wavered, not out of anger, but because something within her, deeper than the habit of control and power, had been shaken. Monica didn't bow her head. She didn't say thank you. She didn't apologize for defying the classical art expectations. She simply stood up from the piano bench, took a step forward onto the stage, and, for the first time in her life, stood still in the very spot she had always been pushed out of, center stage. Not to prove anything, but to be seen. Monica stood in the center of the stage, her heart still beating to the rhythm of the music that had long stopped. Under the lights, she didn't say anything, didn't bow, didn't leave like the other contestants had. For the first time in her life, she didn't need permission to be present. Backstage, her phone began to buzz. First, it was a text message, then two, then a 1-minute and 27-second video, secretly filmed from the hallway outside the audition room, uploaded by an anonymous student to TikTok with the caption, "A black woman with no sheet music, no conservatory degree, no decent piano." And then, she made the whole room cry. By midday, the video had surpassed 3 million views. The next afternoon, Monica was sitting in her office on the 31st floor of Artium Holdings when her phone rang. On the other end, her assistant reported, "CBS wants to film a Breakthrough of the Week segment. NPR just sent an email, and TED Talks, they're asking if you'd like to share about courage in uncredentialed art." Monica didn't speak for a few seconds, as if her experienced business mind didn't know how to process this. Success without strategy. Success simply by daring to live truthfully. And what confused her most wasn't the press, not the reporters, but academia. 3 days after her performance, an email arrived from the academic office of Stratford Conservatory, titled, "Invitation to join an open dialogue on transforming the language of music through non-traditional experience." The sender was Dean Celeste Hanover. Monica read it over 3 times, not because she doubted the content, but because she couldn't believe it came from the person who had once pressured her to play Chopin to be considered legitimate. On the same day, she received invitations from 3 other universities, including one from the Berklee College of Music, where she had once dreamed of attending as a 17-year-old girl, sitting behind a bar with her mother. Each letter conveyed nearly the same message. We want to hear more, not the music, but the voice. Monica didn't respond immediately. Instead, she went home. She sat in front of the old upright piano she had brought back from the Stratford rehearsal room, the instrument that had been excluded from every official stage, but had now become the witness to the recent upheaval. She played a short piece, not to compose, not to prepare for a speech, just to hear what had still not been said within her. The melody rose like an unanswered question. When your entire life has been invisible, and then one day the whole country turns to look at you, who are you? A black woman who once cleaned floors, once tapped on spreadsheets, once was rejected for not having a name in the conservatories, and now a symbol of a forgotten generation within rigid frameworks. And at that moment, a quiet debate began to spread. On art forums, academic councils, and secret groups of critics, a phrase began to appear repeatedly: the Monica Harris effect. Those defending the standards called it a dangerous emotional wave, threatening academic integrity. The younger generation called it the light. A professor who had been teaching for 20 years admitted, "I've never seen students cry over a piece of music like when they heard her." Monica knew well. She didn't play better than anyone else. She simply didn't play to be recognized. And that, in a world where everyone strives to be right, became a quiet revolution, but one that resonated farther than any diploma ever could. A week after the groundbreaking performance, Monica returned to Stratford Conservatory, not as a contestant or a CEO supporting a sponsorship. This time, she entered through the front door, where youthful faces, eyes that had once regarded her with skepticism, now greeted her with hesitant respect. On the frosted glass door of a small classroom in the Northern Academic Wing, freshly installed just the day before, the following nameplate was displayed: Monica Harris, guest faculty, artist in residence. Monica stood before the door for a moment, not entering immediately. She stared at the nameplate, her hand resting lightly on the doorknob. A strange feeling welled up inside her, as if the part of her life that had been buried was now being called back, not to continue playing, but to lead the way. The night before, she had received a private invitation from the very person she had once clashed with on stage, Dean Celeste Hanover. The meeting didn't take place in the dean's office or a hall of honor, but in a small practice room on the upper floor, where the late afternoon sunlight filtered through the old wooden window, casting a stripe of light across the old upright piano like a streak of time. Hanover was sitting waiting for her, not in the powerful blazer she was accustomed to, but in a quartz-colored sweater and a dark shawl. She motioned to the seat opposite her, her voice softer than anything Monica had ever heard. "I used to have a sister just like you." Monica sat down, not reacting immediately. She played music like her life depended on it. No conservatory, no competitions, but she had talent and fire, and then the system. Hanover paused for a beat, her finger tracing the edge of her teacup, swallowed her. With silence, with rejection, with invitations only to exclude. Monica looked at her, no longer tense as she had been before. She simply listened in silence. "I didn't have the courage to protect my sister when I could have," Hanover said, her eyes still not looking up. "Don't let them do that to you." Monica raised an eyebrow. "They?" Hanover finally looked up at her. We, the ones who built gates that only open with the right password." That morning, after the meeting, Monica agreed to return, not as a speaker or inspiration model, but as someone to pass on what every curriculum lacked: perception. She walked into the classroom, where more than 20 students were already waiting. Some had been in the audience during the preliminary auditions. Others had only come to know her through the video. Monica didn't bring a syllabus. She didn't open a PowerPoint. She simply walked straight to the upright piano in the corner of the room. The same old piano that had been offered to her because she wasn't deemed worthy of the Steinway. She turned back to face the class. "I'm not here to teach you how to play like Chopin or Liszt. I'm here to ask one thing. If music is the last thing you can say before the world closes in, what will you play?" The room went silent. The first lesson had no theory. It was just one assignment. Write a piece of music that has never existed. No copying, no editing. Just write what you still hear inside yourself, but have never dared to name. A student raised his hand. "What if it's not by the rules?" Monica smiled. "Good, because music doesn't come to follow rules, it comes to live." The news about the new class spread quickly across the campus. People called it the class without curriculum, the studio of existential emotion. But to the students who were there, they knew exactly. It was the first place they were asked, "What do you hear inside yourself?" That night, Monica returned to the newly arranged temporary office. On her desk, besides a bouquet of flowers from a group of anonymous students, was a handwritten letter. The slanted handwriting was firm. "If my sister were still alive, she'd want to be in your class. Thank you for reminding me that music is not just sound, it's the forgiveness that life sometimes never grants. Celeste." Monica folded the letter and placed it on the bookshelf. She turned to the piano, placed her hand on the keys and played a few notes. Not a piece, not needing an ending. Just a reminder, this time she wasn't playing alone. That evening, the Boston sky wasn't rainy, but the wind blew colder than usual. The yellow lights from the main building of Stratford Conservatory spilled onto the stone steps, casting the shadow of large letters on the banner. Whitmore Invitational, Grand Finale Night. Inside the auditorium, the red velvet seats were filled. The audience wasn't only made up of academics, but also media, journalists, and independent artists. Whispers passed through the rows. Is she really coming? A black CEO? The one who doesn't use sheet music? There's no way she made it past the qualifiers with just emotion. She must have some tricks up her sleeve, right? But no one could deny it. Everyone was there to listen to her. When her name was called, there was no fanfare, no background music, just a pause long enough to feel the weight of the waiting. Monica Harris stepped forward. She wore a black dress that reached her ankles, square neckline, no stones, no satin shine. Her hair was in a low bun. No heavy makeup, no jewelry, except for the old silver bracelet on her right wrist, the last gift from her mother. She walked as if the stage was where she truly belonged, even though her entire life had been spent being kept from stepping onto it. She didn't bring sheet music, no one to turn the pages. She didn't look at the judges. She simply nodded, sat down at the Steinway in the center of the stage, and exhaled a long, steady breath. And then she played. Not like a classical artist, not like a champion wanting to win. She played like someone who had lost their voice, and now chose a way for their soul to be heard. The music had no name, but it was clear. It began with a question. The first notes rang out, not rushed, not rounded as textbooks would teach, but soft, slightly askew, like the voice of someone who had once prayed in the dark with no answer. The audience didn't move. Even the slightest movement could shatter something taking shape, not just music, but its meaning. Then, she deepened with her left hand, creating a thick, dark harmony like the steps of souls that remain unnamed. Her right hand began to recount a journey, not with lyrics, but with memories turned into rhythm. What did they hear in that music? The ticking of the wall clock in the one-bedroom apartment when she was a dropout student. The sound of the mop bucket scraping the hallways when she first started her startup from a borrowed room. Her mother coughing through the night, merging with the sound of the old electric piano as she played a piece she had never finished. And then, in the middle, the music suddenly shifted. The melody became brighter, tighter, as if something inside her was breaking the chains of submission. No longer a piece begging to be heard. It became a declaration. I am here, and I don't need permission to shine. Behind the auditorium, cameras turned on. A reporter from The Atlantic pulled out his phone and began live streaming. Someone from NPR nodded repeatedly as the fourth chord twisted into the blues rhythm. And on social media, the tag number Monica Harris began trending again. But this time, it was no longer the CEO woman who shocked with music, but the music revolution from the soul of a black female CEO. When the piece ended, no one clapped right away. She pulled her hands off the piano, resting them gently on her lap, as if soothing a child who'd been crying for 30 years. And then, a single person stood up from the front row. The curly-haired judge, then the young female judge, then the second row. The whole auditorium stood, not with noise, not with cheers, just standing, like a ritual for the one who had just opened a door no one dared to name before. Dean Celeste Hanover remained seated, her hands clasped in front of her. But this time she didn't look at Monica with judgment. She looked at her with the gaze of a librarian who had just found a manuscript that history had long forgotten. A young student stood in tears. A mother brought her daughter to the stage. An older man, the former director of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, spoke only 4 words, "She is real." Monica left the stage as she entered, no unnecessary expressions, no smile for politeness, only silent eyes, and the fire in her heart that no longer had to be hidden. As the final applause faded like a wave receding slowly, the lights on stage dimmed, leaving only the glow from the central podium, where the Whitmore Grand Prize Crystal Trophy sat, the highest symbol of the prestigious Stratford Conservatory. The name was called. No one was surprised. But everyone stood. The winner of this year's Whitmore Invitational Grand Prize, Monica Harris. No victory fanfare. No exaggerated walk. Monica walked slowly, as if each step was a part of the music she had just completed. Dean Celeste Hanover, who a year ago would never have thought to award the highest honor to someone outside the system, stood at the podium, holding the crystal trophy, her face calm as still water, but in her eyes, something had shattered and been reborn. She extended the trophy toward Monica. No wide smile, just a steady, deep, and true look, for the first time. When Monica reached out to take the trophy, Celeste bowed her head slightly and whispered, just loud enough for Monica alone to hear, "You didn't just win this competition. You opened the door for a whole generation." Monica looked straight into her eyes. No need to reply, because they both knew it was the truth. A week after the award ceremony, the Executive Board of Stratford sent an official invitation. "We are honored to invite Ms. Monica Harris to join as guest faculty, with full autonomy to design her own program." And Monica agreed. But not to stand at a traditional lectern, holding chalk, teaching rhythm and formulas. Her only request, "I don't want to teach music, I want to teach listening, not with the ears, but with the heart." Her first class opened on a Friday afternoon. No whiteboard, no syllabus, no rows of chairs. only an upright piano placed in the center of a circular room, where light from the glass ceiling fell onto the wooden floor like light streaming down from a church onto the place of confession. She entered, not introducing her title, not mentioning her award. She simply asked, "Who here has ever played a piece of music they've never dared let anyone hear?" 3 hands went up, then 6, then nearly the entire room. And from that day a new program was born. Not part of the official curriculum, but called by students a name that spread throughout the campus: the Permissionless Studio. In there, Monica didn't correct every finger position. She asked, "Why are you afraid of that part? Is that the note you truly want to play, or is it the note someone else taught you to choose?" She allowed students to stop playing midway. She let them try again without judgment. She taught them that wrong notes weren't mistakes. They were warnings that the heart was being strangled. In the hallway of Stratford, where photos of champions in tuxedos and gowns once hung, now there was a new frame. Monica wasn't alone in it. It was a picture of her sitting next to a student, both smiling brightly, surrounded by incomplete piano keys. The caption read, "Not a winner, a door opener." A week after the groundbreaking performance, Monica Harris, once an outsider in the Whitmore Invitational list, was now known by many names: the Queen of Unwritten Music, the breaker of the art education structure, the piano voice of the forgotten generation. But in every article, every interview, she would only claim one thing: "I am someone who was silent for too long, and I finally learned how to speak." Stratford Conservatory, which once kept its doors closed to those who didn't fit the system, had now expanded through her footsteps. Monica's classroom was always the last to light up. Not because of the teaching schedule, but because there were students who only dared to play the piano when no one was watching. And she was always the one who stayed, not to teach, but to listen. She didn't have a traditional syllabus, she didn't grade with numbers. She asked each person, "If you had only one performance left in your life, what would you play?" And if a student hesitated, she would simply smile. "Then we'll begin with silence." Time magazine called her the living legend of perceptive art. NPR produced a special podcast series called Monica's Keys, documenting the informal lessons where she helped those who had lost faith in music rediscover themselves through each piano key. One of her speeches at TEDx Boston spread like wildfire. Sometimes talent doesn't wear a cloak, doesn't study at Juilliard, doesn't have a mentor. Sometimes it wears a CEO's suit and waits for a piano to be unlocked. And throughout those years, Monica didn't become a television star, didn't set up a scholarship fund in her name, didn't open her own academy as many had advised. She stayed. With the old piano, with the practice room that had no mirrors, with those who once thought their voices weren't beautiful enough to be heard. One October afternoon, Monica received a handwritten letter from a small high school in suburban Charlotte. An 8th-grade student, named Ariel, wrote in slanted, firm handwriting with some smudged ink, "Ms. Harris, I've watched your video more than 10 times. I used to think I had nothing to play because I couldn't read sheet music. But then I wrote my own song. I named it Window Light, because I only play it when the light shines into the room, when no one knows." Monica placed the letter next to the piano. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she opened the piano lid. Not to perform, not to prepare a lecture, not to check emails from an academic council, but to sit down and play. In her small apartment on the 7th floor, where the window overlooked the rooftops, glowing with city lights, Monica placed her hand on the keys. The old upright piano, which had been with her through every moment of silence and eruption, now emitted sounds that no longer carried pain, but acceptance. She played for no one. Not for fame, not for the articles, not for the packed auditorium. She played for herself. For the 10-year-old Monica who once learned music secretly after her mother's shifts. For the 30-year-old woman who once thought dreams had an expiration date. For all the voices that had been interrupted by power, structure, and expectation. And in that quiet room, there were no claps, no praise, only music flowing through the whole circle of life. And when the final note rang out, not high, not loud, but softly, like a whisper left in time, Monica smiled gently. Not because of the music, but because for the first time in her life, she knew. She was no longer in the dark. The door had been opened, not for her to step out, but for others to step in. Have you ever felt like the world decided who you were before you even had the chance to speak? Monica Harris once was that person, but she proved that dreams don't expire, and light always finds those who dare to stand up, even when no one invites them in. What about you? If you had only one piece to play, no grading, no prizes, what would you play? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your story. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs a door to open, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories. Because sometimes, just one person daring to play their true voice is enough to make the whole world listen.